Mr. John Mayo. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you did. You nailed it. It's just like
Okay.
the spread.
It's funny because with some of these names, you you read it one way and it seems to be okay. This is the only possible pronunciation of this name. And then the
Hmm.
person says it differently. Like instead of Michelle, they say Mitchell or Michelle, and it's just like, well, you might as well just ask, right?
Yes. Yeah,
It's
like
the only way to
there's
ever get anything right.
yes, absolutely. I was talking with someone once and they had TX in their name, but it was silent and I didn't understand. So it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, here we go. And it was like 6 or 7 years ago, so I'm struggling to remember, but it was a fairly common name, like Gregory, but it was like the TX was just in there. And I was like, what help me understand. They're like, I don't know, man. My parents did it and I've rocked with it. It's silent. I was like, all right, party on, let's go.
Well, I've even seen in some people's situations where I had a conversation like this yesterday with one of the people, and his last name is so complex to pronounce that he just started using his middle name.
And there you
And
go.
it's almost like, they're two first names, so to speak. But at the same time, it's just like it makes it easier for, I think, the guest, the host, everyone else who's tuning in. I remember watching it, and it's just like, why not? So I figured the easier you can make it, probably the better off it is, right? For all the parties.
Hmm. I take the same approach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
I'm glad we're able to do this because I wanted to connect with you and I wanted to learn about your experience of what it was like to be able to put your words to paper in expressing your gratitude to one of the people that you and I are creating a book for. And I guess the very first thing that came to mind as I was thinking about it was, what was the entire experience like? Was it difficult to be able to express your gratitude? Do you already practice that? So is it kind of like one of those daily things that you already do, so it's not a big deal? Or was it really a challenge to be able to answer the question of what makes this person a gift in your life?
Yeah, for me, I'm very intentional in uh, both embodying and expressing gratitude and affection. I do a lot of things that have helped me to build the confidence to be vulnerable in that expression. I also have 4 sons that I want to raise to be what I consider a healthy expression of masculinity, which on the one hand understands emotion, can express gratitude, love, compassion to the men in their life that bring joy, as well as everyone else. And also, spit on their hands and hoist the black flag when necessary. Right? It's
Mm.
both. It's and. So for myself, when you reached out of the blue to talk about the ham sandwich that will not be named, and I can say that because I myself am a ham sandwich, right? But it was too easy for me to express like, oh, how cool is this? And immediately I wanted to get to know you better,
Mm.
right? In the project, because it is rare, right? You say I love you to someone, and they're not accustomed to that, and they hide it behind other phrases, or they like try to infer it. And I just found that with a lot of folks, once they kind of pass into the friend level, I have love for them and
Mhm.
I want to express that love and I want to foster that because it creates light and unity and opportunity for greater joy and richness of community. So for me, it's too easy to be the uncomfortable, vulnerable person who's like, hey, I love you. And like, they get hit in the face and a few weeks later, they say it back like awkwardly, and then they get
Mhm.
comfortable with it. And the next thing you know, every time you see them, you get an "I love you" and a hug, and it just kind of fosters that. So for myself, it's something that I've been intentionally cultivating for a while now. So when this opportunity came up, it was an exciting, refreshing uh, opportunity to express that for someone, right?
Mm.
And immediately fell in love with what you do and wanted to support that. So that's
Mhm.
at least how it struck me and what I thought about it.
It's interesting that you even mentioned the concept of love or the words I love you, because I found that within my own journey, it's something that I still find difficult. And I especially find difficult to say to my male friends, for example. Well, that's not even necessarily true. I pretty much find it difficult to say to anybody. And I don't know where that ultimately stems from. I don't know if it's from the fact that I didn't, or I may not have heard those words long enough when I was younger to get comfortable with it, nor did I put it into practice. But I know sometimes, and I don't know if you experience this or not, but I have a friend, I have a couple of my friends with whom I have 9 to 10 to 15-year friendships. And sometimes they'll just end the call with like, I love you, man. And I'm just like deer struck in the headlights. I don't, I don't know I don't know what to say. And I'm at a loss of words, which is a relatively uncommon thing for me at this chapter of my life. There's always a story I can tell, but that's just one of those moments. And I've been trying to better understand that. Where does it come from? What's ultimately behind it? How do you understand that? Did you have a similar journey with that concept?
Yeah, I think that for me at least, not to project this on you, but for
Mm-hmm.
myself, I've not always done this, right? This is something I've really leaned into cultivating over the last couple of years. And, someone else who's like very popular that does this well is Lex Friedman. And I appreciate the manner in which he expresses love. Um, and I learned about him and started following him more later in this journey for myself. But I think he's a good, like, additional person to think about as we talk about this,
Mm.
because and I'll speak from my own perspective, but he's a good example people can check out because he oftentimes talks about this as well. But for myself, I think the reticence not to say it comes from a deep-seated, elusive fear of hurt and
Mm.
fear of loss. Because at least for myself, once I realized that I cared for someone deeply and their existence enriched my life, that for me was the parameter of love. And uh, I, over the last 5, 6 years, have become very intentional on who I cultivate relationships with outside of the distant acquaintance level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be an acquaintance that I continue talking with, I'm going to like you. There's going to be mutual benefit. That's a necessity, because otherwise I will not continue to cultivate that relationship
Mm-hmm.
if we're not creating value in some capacity together. And then naturally over time, if that continues and we're continuing to create value together and enrich each other's lives, at some point it crosses over into what I consider like the friend level. And
Mm-hmm.
that friendship, there's a lot more trust and vulnerability. We've gone through more, and there's a whole spectrum of what that looks like. But at that point where we're in continuous communication, we're enriching each other's lives, I'm like, what does it cost me to allow myself the freedom to experience love for this person and light up when I get to see them? And I was like, well, it cost me a lot more not to give myself that freedom. So
Mm-hmm.
I just started expressing it to see what does it feel like, and it felt good, frankly. Um, but there's always the fear of loss or discomfort or concern that, and I'm not even concerned if the other person is uncomfortable or unfamiliar with those terminology, because most are. But I realize it just allows me to do that, and it has, especially over the course of years, significantly increased the quality of the inner community that I fellowship with, whether it's across, state lines, country lines, or in person, because it creates this human, humble authenticity to it once
Mm-hmm.
that is injected in, and it's been there for a little bit. And it begins to create what I've seen, at least, as freedom uh, for the other person and myself to show up as we are. So it's
Mm-hmm.
this, but I have had to lead with vulnerability in that, right? Myself, to allow that to occur. And I'm okay with accepting hurt in that, right? Because to cultivate trust, I think you lead by example, and the manner in which you lead is by expressing things with vulnerability. And that you have to accept a certain level of risk that if you express that vulnerability, that you can be hurt uh, or rejected. And at this point, at least in my life, I've cultivated the confidence such that I'm okay with that. I accept and tolerate that risk. And, and love can be lost, right? And that's the other thing. So for me, love is not a permanent thing. Things can happen that betray the trust and the love that's fostered, to the point where that love can be lost, unfortunately, and that's always sad. And the relationship can be changed, and that distance can grow back again. So it's not permanent. It's something that's like I use this analogy of a shared lawn. Like there's there's a lawn of grass between us. And in every relationship, there's this like plot of grass, and we're both responsible for cultivating this grass for healthiness, weeding it, nourishing it, watering it, making sure it's good to go. And if we're both investing in that, then at some point we've created something beautiful, right? And I won't go further into the analogy because there's a lot there and I don't want to talk too long on it. But if we've created something beautiful, we might as well love that which we've created and allow it to nourish us. And if all of a sudden you kill the grass, it's okay, you just destroyed something beautiful. Maybe that's mendable. Maybe we can work through it. Or maybe the grass is now dead and I can remember the joy of the season in which that love, that relationship brightened our lives. And I can focus on that, but I know to set up the boundary to protect myself and those I care for to not continue in it.
Okay, so that's a really good point. And there are a couple of things that you said that I think are very interesting or worthwhile exploring even more. The first one is the whole concept of relationships. And the question that I personally have been exploring is, so for me, for example, I really value frequency. I'm not a huge believer of the concept of let's stay in touch. I just don't. I don't think it happens. And I think if we do stay in touch, it will be too infrequent for it to happen in order for it to continue to add meaningful value to that relationship. I very much prefer the route that you do and that I share, and that's, hey, if we actually want to be a part of each other's lives, let's at least put something in the calendar whenever, every 2 weeks, every month, every 6 months, some duration that's not too long to the point where where you forget who the person is, but it's also not too short. So you're giving yourself room and time to make some sort of progress with whatever endeavors that you're working on. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you personally cultivate these relationships? Like you mentioned the analogy of the grass, right? So I'm assuming there are parts that you're going to do. And then do you have an expectation for the other person to do similar, different things? Like how do you create that space for the other, so the other person also knows that, okay, it's not just for John to pick up the phone and call me every time. I also have a role. And what is my role? Because some people don't know how to identify that role in friendships.
Yeah, that's very fair. And a shameless plug, I have a whole chapter in my book called Be Relentless that's called Watering the Lawn. And it precedes a chapter called Communal Creatures that more deeply nuanced explores this. And of course, we're going to go into that in conversation now. But just so that's said, perhaps born from my experiences growing up through the military through now, I see friendships or relationships through like a large spectrum of categories. So, and I think it depends on how you meet, how you bond, how the relationship is formed, on how it can continue, right? So I have gentlemen that I consider brothers to me. We deeply bonded over the course of a few years, over a decade ago. And we maybe talk once or twice a year now. And that's more of that keep in touch thing. The bond that we created was so close, and the understanding that we created was so close that we're able to pick up where we left off, understanding there's been a great expanse of time between conversations. So we get to catch up and kind of update our understanding of each other in each conversation. But in those capacities, there's also a freedom of, what is it? If you love them, let them go. I've learned this. I've learned this idea that there's friends for a time, a season. Maybe they're just there to throw shade at you for a second, and maybe they're there for a lifetime. And especially those that are there for a lifetime or for a season, if we look at life as an adventure that we're journeying forward in, as we're working to find our way and help each other find our way home or to peace, then our paths may intersect at times and then diverge. They may intersect once and never intersect again. They may run parallel to each other, interconnected for a long time. Or maybe that's for a year. It all varies. So for myself, when I look at these relationships that were built and trust was formed, like, especially for those that are still in the service and I'm no longer in the service, I understand that our trajectories have changed. And because of that trajectory change, we're not going to have the same level of interconnectedness. And it actually creates an unhealthy burden for us to try to keep a high level of maintenance, as opposed to saying, hey, I love you, I trust you, as life evolves, I hope, and we are working towards having our paths interconnect more frequently. But until then, go in peace and freedom. And I look forward to connecting with you. And that's like one whole type of friendship. And then the ones who you walk in more daily community, I just have a real loose hold, frankly, on how long those seasons will last, right? Will I get a walk in close community with you for 3 months, a year, 10 years? There's so many variables in the multidimensionality of life that can affect that aren't necessarily bad or need to be damaging to the friendship. So, like if you have to move or something, that changes the dynamics. There is something as frequency and shared goals that allow for greater, tighter daily community to exist. So when those shift or life circumstances shift, instead of choosing to be hurt by that, I choose to accept that as part of life, focus on the gratitude for the time of intimacy and closeness, and then allow the freedom to have that change or morph into whatever's healthy for this new season. And giving myself that freedom of allowing these things to evolve and change and become less frequent and then more frequent, and then sometimes just letting people go as well, has freed me to love more. And then very shortly to your specific question, what I do is if I start to feel that I am investing the majority of the energy into the relationship, right? If we look at the lawn, I'm the one, if I feel like I'm watering more and nourishing it more, weeding more, I'll turn it off. I'll turn the water off, so to speak. I'll take a intentional pause and stop reaching out. And what I'm doing there is observing. I'm not punishing. I'm not working to like be spiteful, but I'm observing, hey, is my emotion and perception lying to me? Or is it an actual intuition that I'm overextending myself for something that's not being reciprocated in the care and intentionality of the other individual? And I'll wait. And typically those who are investing, and I'm wrong about that will reach out in a short amount of time, be like, hey man, pour abundantly back in, depending on how long that is. And we'll just keep reinvesting. I'll say, yes, I was concerned that I was doing X, Y, and Z, and that might have been beginning to become unhealthy. So I wanted to see where you were on it. And I figured the best way I could do that is just allow the freedom of opportunity to see if you even noticed my absence and if you cared about this in the same manner. And that's been incredibly refreshing but it's also painful because if you're doing that with a lot of people and then you just shut the water off because you feel like you're overextending yourself in all these directions and then no one reaches out, you have to go through a season of what can feel incredibly lonely. And I've done that. But now the relationships are such that if I'm quiet for a few days, the people who are in my inner circle are like, hey, what are you doing? And that keeps it much healthier.
What's different about that? What's different about the relationships now compared to how you were building them back then?
I think it's me. I think that I allowed my own insecurity and desire for closeness and connection and I'm a very passionate, driven, exuberant person. And because of that,
he is. For anyone listening, he is. I've witnessed that firsthand.
Yeah. So, with that, like, if you're on my mind, I'm going to reach out. I'll text you in the morning.
Yeah.
At night, I'll call you. I'll schedule get-togethers. I'll host. I'll just pour myself out endlessly. And part of that's because I want the relationship. I'm a heavily communal person. I thrive from an inner circle. I consider myself more of an introvert than an extrovert in that I desire to, being in crowds exhausts me, but being amongst people I know and trust supercharges me. So it's kind of a mix. But because of my own insecurity and fear of aloneness, I would just pour myself out endlessly before. And now I have a pretty good system of once I start to question, what's going on here? I'll just turn the water off. I'll stop the efforts. And once again, it's not to punish, it's to test my own intentions. And I've lost air quotes. My path has diverged from many, many friends. Like over the last 4 years since starting this practice, who I spend time with has changed by over 90%. And in the early phases, that was very painful because I lost the entire community that I cultivated that I realized I was superficially fostering.
Mm.
But in letting that go and in continuing forward and in forcing myself to continue to love, uh, you know, I've been blessed with people who've come into my life that I've attracted that also pour into and desire the same thing. And because I keep the discipline of not taking on the majority of the load, um, routinely, I'm able to see that they are also investing in the relationship.
Mm.
And because we're both investing, we it's just changed. I think it's forcing myself to be uncomfortable through the insecurity of loss to find those who will actually fight alongside and work with you. And that's been a big change. And I will say one other thing on that that's critically important. I don't believe in the premise of 50-50, right? I give 50%, you give 50%, and then we have this cool relationship. False. It's 100-100. If I'm not
Yes.
giving everything I
Yes.
have and you're not giving everything you have, we're screwed. This ain't going to work. It's going to be an
Yes.
acquaintance at best. And those are the things that have shifted. And that's especially powerful in marriage. And then like those close partnership relationships. I think it's in like the closer the relationship, the more important that everyone's giving 110 than anything less, because otherwise it's not growing. It's maintaining at best, which is really dying. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I don't even know where to begin. Well, I'll begin with this. So I have been wanting to have a conversation like this for probably a number of years. And it's just funny how it's interesting, whatever the word is, how life presents these opportunities. And even though you might connect with thousands of people, but it's the 1,001 that you're able
Mm-hmm.
to have a conversation like this that is not to blame, to embarrass, to guilt anyone or anything, but more so just to honestly observe what life has been like in building communities. And one of the things that I personally found somewhat challenging, and I think I'm at a point right now very similar to your space where I have cultivated relationships that I can actually, not to say that I didn't grow personally and professional with the other ones, I certainly did. But in these, I feel that many of them are much more lifetime relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting dynamic to experience because as I look back at a lot of the relationships that I've had, even in the past 5 years, 90%, just like you said, are completely different today.
Mm-hmm.
Some remained, but most of them have become different people. And one of the things that I personally seek for in people, especially when it comes to, let's say, like business relationships, although I think it's so much more than that. It's really, for me, it's relationships through which you can um, create and achieve these things that you desire for. Not every relationship is capable of doing that, nor wants to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but there are some people that do it. And I know for me, that's been one of the desires, is meeting people like that. Like, not even kidding, meeting people like you. For anyone that's going to be listening, John and I met, and I think it was that first phone call. We literally committed to, like, hey, I'm going to introduce you to this person. I'm going to help you this way. I'm going to help you this way. And boom, we actually did it. Now, I don't know if that's how it works in all of your relationships that you meet, but that's a rare thing for me to experience, when someone actually takes the time in the moment and makes those things happen. Now, once again, I'm not blaming people for who they are. I think there's a purpose in the role for both. I think there's a purpose for having people who just talk to talk, and one, not blaming them, but I think there's beauty in contrast, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's beauty in being able to see the contrast in life. So people who do the things, and then people who say they're going to do the things, and people who don't do the things. Seeing all three, I look at it as a tremendous opportunity for me to learn and grow from, because now I can see the other sides of it. Now I can experience, oh, if I don't do this, this might unfold. Or if I don't say this, this might happen. So it's interesting to observe the different relationships that we're a part of. And for me, the thing that I was curious from your perspective was, how do you know that this is a person worth taking a chance on? Or do you take a chance on everyone and let them kind of prove it through time, through whatever other factors, that, okay, maybe me going 110 is not them wanting to go 110, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Do you take a chance on every encounter, or are there specific ones that you just like know that, okay, I feel something here, I'm gonna go all in here?
On the contrast piece, I'd agree that there's a thought I'm fond of, which is light cannot exist without the darkness. So
Yes.
I firmly believe that. And I do think that I show up to each new opportunity to meet someone. I work to show up as consistently as possible as who I am, which is a pretty aggressive outpouring of self. And I think over time, it's possible to hone a skill in identifying the types of like things that you can observe that will tell you early on how's this relationship going to evolve, right? So, given that, I don't sustain 110 past the first interaction unless I sense indicators that are reciprocal, right? So, like when we met, I was like very interested in how I can help you, and you were very interested in how you could help me. And because we did that, I just kept pouring into it, and you kept pouring into it, and then we both followed through on it. So it was like, okay, we're both doing this, so why would I stop that? That's great. And then on the other side, right, I'll pour that out for someone I meet, don't know from Adam, but I meet him. And for that 30 minutes, I pour through and then I follow through, right? And I will follow through for them on the things I commit to. And I observe what they do, right? And then we just, it kind of goes from there. There may just be genuinely not an interest or a need for us to be continuing, and that's fine. So typically, I work to show up and pour myself out, and I watch and I observe very closely what they're doing. And this isn't some sort of quid pro quo. It's just I want to actively listen and pay with incredible intention in great detail to the other human being to see how I can serve them, how I can help them, how might our paths interact, because you never know when you jump on a call with a stranger or you get to meet someone if that is someone who's going to walk through the rest of your life with. And I want to know, because that is super interesting to me, because I think that community and connection really are some of the most fundamentally life enriching things that we can cultivate. So that's how I approach it. I show up, I pour myself out, and then I watch the response. And at this point, I think I'm fairly in tune to understand, like, will there be a next step? Will this continue or not? And then that kind of is just iteratively and just goes interaction to interaction to interaction. And, you can have, at least what I've observed, it can be full 110% for years from both people. And then all of a sudden, a kiddo's born, or someone has to move, or they get indigestion, and all of a sudden it just cuts off. And, depending on the depth and breadth of that relationship, of course, you're going to do welfare checks. Hey, how are you? What's going on? All those types of things. But sometimes it's something that just needs work through. Sometimes they just need some space. And sometimes something has just fundamentally shifted such that it's time for the relationship to transform. And once again, having that loose hold on, it's okay that we walked closely together for a decade and now we're not, because that decade was beautiful. I think that has given me the most freedom to love, because I don't feel the need that if I love you, you have to be with me for the rest of my life. And if I did feel that way, I could not love like I do, because it would be so painful and such a constraint upon my capacity to commune with other human beings that I'd be crippled, frankly.
Where'd you learn this from? Where'd you learn this particular thing from? Was it the military, or is it something else?
No, broad stroke, I would not say the military, though I did love my men deeply. I didn't know how to articulate it like that at the time. And the military is an interesting thing, because at least in the positions I held, I was responsible to, at any moment, make a decision that would send them to their death to accomplish the mission. So, and potentially
That's
myself.
an interesting space to be in.
It is, and it is the military, right? So it's not unique to me in any capacity, but when you choose to serve in the military, the mission comes first. And that's because what you're fighting for is of such great importance, or ought to be, and that should never be abused, that under any circumstances. No, I'll step away from that. But that, especially as a leader, you realize that you may have to make a decision that will cost your men their lives or you your life or all of the above to accomplish that mission or to set the conditions to accomplish that mission, because what that mission represents is more significant than that sacrifice. And that's what you raise your hand to take an oath to protect the Constitution. And why is that so important? It's because the opportunities that we experience that are so beautiful in this country are born from freedom, from individual sovereignty and freedom and liberty to be able to express and explore and pursue life, love, community, the pursuit of happiness, creation of value, these things. And we're only as strong as we're individually free. So when you really sit and look at these contexts, it's something bigger than self, worth fighting for and God, and worth living for, which is far harder than dying, but also potentially dying. And that was an interesting time because, I truly loved my men and I truly loved my unit. And at the same time, you looked at your mortality very closely in the face and realized how fleeting it is and how swiftly it can be gone. And that did free me, I think, in some ways, but I was too broken at the time to be able to express things in these terms. So I think that how I learned this has been a mix of intentional cultivation of self in pursuit of a better version of self. And the more that I have focused on that, which has been the primary focus for about the last 7 years of my life, the more I found that the best thing that I believe I can do is create an environment in which myself, those I'm responsible for, those that I'm in community with, are able to pursue significance, expend their lives in that pursuit, create immense value, which creation is a whole nother topic, and to build strong communities. And in doing those things, we are better served by focusing on that which unifies us than which divides us to the best of our abilities. And that starts with a foundation of vulnerability, trust, and love. And the more I've worked on destroying the elements of myself that I didn't care for, there's kind of this learning point through that process. And there's been, thousands of hours of reading, study, writing, exploration, and conversation, to what we're talking about today. But I came to the realization that, like we talked about earlier, light cannot exist without the darkness. I can't destroy the elements of myself that I hated. I had to learn how to stop the behaviors that were unacceptable, but choose, how can I incorporate this element of self that's acting out in this way so that I'm a whole person?
Yes.
And when that realization hit, I realized that to hate myself is to destroy myself, which is to not create. So I had to learn how to incorporate all elements of myself, being intentional in which actions I will allow and not allow, so that I choose the type of man I will be today and moving forward. And in doing that, I learned to love and respect myself and cultivate myself. And that put me in a position where I'm operating from this place where my cup, if you look at a cup and like however much energy is in it is how full the cup is. Well, my cup's overflowing. And because I am fostering and continuing to cultivate that, I'm able to continuously pour out into my family. And because I'm doing that, that creates a reciprocal process of this creation of value, love, and community within my family. Well, that continues to fill the cup. So it then overflows outside of my house into my community.
Yeah.
And then that replicates into the world. And it's a movement to context style exploration that I will continue to engage in for the rest of my life. But I think that's how I've learned it such far. And this is how I can articulate it to this point.
Well, it's also such an interesting path to be on, right? This whole process of growth and development, because I've learned that when I stepped onto it as well, 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago by now, it's one of those things where it's an interesting dilemma to be in, because there's a part of you, in my opinion, when you actually step onto this path and you start to realize some of these things, then there's almost like no reason to step off. In fact, I think that's probably even more challenging to step away from growth, consider that you've done it for so many years, because at a certain point it becomes all you know. The other component is that it's such an interesting space to be in, because it can be a challenging path for sure. I mean, confronting your own inner fears, insecurities, everything else, and developing this observer point of view where you can actually see and reflect and do something about it. I now see why some people don't choose to go down those paths in life, because I can't tell you the number of times that I've looked myself in the mirror and said, why am I doing this? Like, what, this is extremely challenging right now. Why not just pick the other way? And I think to some degree, what I've learned through my own journey is that choosing this path, I've developed, I don't know whether it's developed or just accessed whatever resilience I already had within me, but definitely that was one of the highlights. And then the other part is, I think this is kind of the overarching question that many people try to answer is, if you go down this path, does your life become more fulfilling, more fun, more enjoyable, more this, more of that? And I think it's a really complex question, because it entirely depends on the individual's ability to process any of the experiences that we go through. Is every single day that you and I wake up, is it instantly bright and shiny and you're just beaming with happiness and stuff like that? No, that's not true. At least it's not true for me. So there's certain things that I know I have to cultivate as a practice, like gratitude. I mean, I tend to think of myself as a grateful individual because I believe I have a good heart. That's what I truly know about who I am. But there are times when I wake up and I don't feel that way. I don't feel grateful. So I think at a certain point, at least what I'm picking up from you is that some of this, it almost has to become a practice in order for you to actively live that lifestyle, right? Like I wake up choosing to express my gratitude to the people, either the day of, the week of, the month of, the year of, the whatever of. That's a choice. I can easily go through the rest of the day, not acknowledge it, not do anything about it, but I'm choosing to do it differently. And then within that choice, there is like a component that I think happens that we may or may not know information about, and that's ripples, vibrations. I mean, at a certain point, I don't know if you believe in this or not, but I just stopped believing in coincidences. The people that I started to meet or attract or whatever into my life, I'm like, there's no way this is a coincidence. There's no way it's a coincidence that I met you. There's no way it's a coincidence that we're doing what we're doing. Now, it took however many different encounters, right, to get to some of these people. But I think the point of it all is that it's possible. It truly is possible to meet people who are vibrating on the same or similar frequencies that you are in life, with which you can build some of these things with.
Yeah, fundamentally I agree. I think that the primary differentiator for those who do this or not comes down to their willingness to endure consistently over time.
Yes.
And frankly, that's it, because what we're talking about is a choice, and that choice is daily, but you're choosing your hard. So I would agree. I look at growth as a nonlinear cycle. And if you picture like an X and Y axis with a line that's going up and to the right, which is like the symbolic growth element, instead of, it may look like that if you're standing on the other side of the room, but the closer you walk to it, you'll start to see that it's a wave of ups and downs. And the goal is to have it trending upward and out, in that growth trajectory. But then as you get closer, it's not just a wave of ups and downs that over time is trending upward, but it's 1,000 micro circles up and down on this trending growth. And those circles can get so tight that within the hour, you may experience 3 ups and downs. Within the day, you may experience a dozen, right? It's not always sunshine and rainbows. There can be times where you're battling despair and glee in the same hour. And but
It's funny, but it's so true.
it is. And that image is also captured somewhere in Be Relentless. But what's fun with that is, like, if you look at growth, it also gives us the freedom to say, oh, I want to grow and it's hard and I'm struggling right now. Well, yeah, man, you're human. Congratulations. Welcome to the party. And the other thing, the way I look at it is, like, what's the alternative? You're going to choose your hard. Like, you know what? If we use fitness as a fun analogy,
Yeah.
it's difficult to exercise the discipline, consistency to train every day. But the benefits are, having a healthy body, a more robust mind because of that, and a bunch of other things. Well, it's also difficult to not do that and to be obese and live life trapped within your own body with the health complications that come with that. So you're choosing your hard. The same thing with relationships. It's difficult to learn how to cultivate a better version of yourself and to cultivate healthy relationships. And it has a lot of ups and downs and costs associated. It's very difficult. But the reward is that you, over time, learn how to create strong, vibrant community. Well, let's flip this on the head. It's also very difficult to wall yourself off and live life desperately alone.
Yes.
So what outcome are you willing to accept? And in that, which hard are you going to choose? Because, there's this idea from Viktor Frankl that between every stimulus and reaction, there's a gap. And in that gap is our power to choose our response. And within that lies our freedom, which is a fundamental element of how I see my life philosophy, if that makes sense. And for myself, I'm going to choose this idea that the obstacle is the way. And I'm going to set myself in the trajectory to create as much value as possible and transforming that obstacle into an opportunity, which is the fundamental premise of what I call the waymaker philosophy. If the obstacle is the way, we must be waymakers. Well, why? Because I'd much rather pay the price to cultivate strong community, the pain and the joys, the ups and the downs, the burning off of bad behavior and the cultivating of the broken self to a better self, so that I might enjoy the gift of rich community and relationships, than, because of fear of hurt, take the path of isolation and aloneness and despair that ultimately, in my opinion, leads to death. So, this sad, sanguine existence. So yeah, I may suffer, but my life is so much richer. And the other person will suffer as well. But for what? For nothing. And they die alone. So for me, it's not even a choice. Once you start on this path and once you endure enough to begin seeing the progress, what is the alternative? That you're going to go back? Why? There's nothing there for you except loneliness and despair. So it's just, and that's why I think, like, why would I stop growing? Like, do I want to diminish? Do I want to shrink? No. Like, I want to continue to explore the vibrancy that this life holds and what can be created. And I think that the further down that path, the more resilience and tolerance for loss there is, because at some point you realize you may meet 1,000 people and one becomes dear to you. Well, it's worth meeting all 1,000 for the one. And there's going to be a lot of good in that 1,000 as well. So at least that's how I think through, like, this as we continue.
Well, also, I think to some degree, what I've learned is that once you know, I think it's nearly impossible to unknow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the true about this path. That's the true about just any point in life, is that once you know certain things, it's impossible to you unknow. So then it becomes, am I willing to sit with the tension and resistance of what I already know, but yet I'm pursuing something different due to knowing that. And I think it's an interesting path for sure. It's an interesting path to be on. I think you hit the nail on the head as far as it being a game of endurance. I think that's really I think it really is as simple as that. It's how much are you able to endure, and maybe something else that happens is the more you endure, the more that thing expands, and so your muscle's bound to get stronger because you've experienced these elements before, and it's just a really fascinating space.
Mm-hmm.
to be in, and I think it can have so much to offer. Now I think a lot of that boils down to your ability to be an active participant within that. Literally how you and I started this conversation about watering grass. I think it's the same exact thing when it comes to your own journey.
Mm-hmm.
Life is happening with or without you. Life is happening all around you every given day. The difference is, what role are you going to play within that life?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to engage with it? To what degree? How? Why? Are you going to identify some of those things? And then from there, just let it, I don't even know what the word is, but let it live through you, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, well, completely accurate. And if we explore two concepts, first, the life will continue regardless, right? It's going to go on,
With or without you. Yep.
with or without you. And people, I think people really cling to the idea of their irreplaceability, but that's not true. One of the gifts that I did learn in the military is I watched myself be replaced overnight multiple times. That's how the military is trained. That's you want to set your teams up so that if you get stuffed out, they can continue. And
Mm.
so when you change roles or positions, you watch someone come and step in, and literally overnight, the organization's different and you're replaced. And getting to observe that, I think, is really healthy, because it breaks across this lie that, like, you have to be irreplaceable. No, you just want to create as much value while you're there, and maybe be remembered, right? But if you set up, in your life such that you're irreplaceable, you've done a great disservice to those you're with. So,
Mm.
which goes back to the ability to let go and continue forward, right? But accepting that, right? Like, there's existential crises that occur when people have not wrestled with this idea and they watch themselves be replaced, right? It can be very painful if you don't face this one head on. But I think it's fundamentally true. Like, and thank God that I am replaceable, right? The last thing I would want is for me to die today and my wife to live the rest of her life alone. You know, um, I want her to have the freedom and the ability to create something new and live a vibrant life in whatever way makes sense to her. Now, I have no intent of dying, but that's a fairly extreme example. And then when you look at it professionally with friendships, it's a little bit easier to see it in those contexts. And then on the concept of endurance, and if we look at that growth chart that we talked about with the micro cycles and everything else, I think we need to give ourselves the grace to take a pause. When we realize, when we have the moment of awareness that we're at the bottom of one of these cycles and we're suffering and we don't see how we can have the strength to continue, we shouldn't. I strongly advocate that we do not throw in the towel, but we pause. We eat.
Mm.
We get a little bit of rest. We take a short break. We allow a bit of time to pass so that our perspective can shift with the renewing of our energy to stay the course. So not to make a drastic decision because of a momentary emotional experience. And that's important on both sides of the spectrum. But there's this beautiful article I read years ago that, like, as humans, we're very aware that females go through cycles monthly, right, as part of their biology, and that has hormonal responses and effects on their bodies that they navigate. Well, what's not talked about, reproductively and everything, right? Well, what's not talked about is men also have hormonal cycles that they go through on a monthly basis. And within that, there's, like, I think that we can all think of days where we feel exuberantly creative, like we can conquer the world. We're going to create these things. We want to do these things, right? And it's like, I'm going to do all of this. And what's cool is, and then there's days where it's like, screw everything. That was a stupid idea. Everything else. And what I've learned is, when we acknowledge that we're going to have these cycles, like, baked into our biology, we can choose our responses and systemize those responses to set us up for better success. So what I do is, when I'm riding the wave of being incomparable and creative, taking over the world, I create as much as possible. And then when I feel like death, right? Instead of letting myself take a complete knee, I choose to do proofreading work then. So, and what I found is, like, if you extend the time horizon out over a couple of those cycles, you'll create a bunch of stuff, you'll kill off 90% of it. Create a bunch of stuff, kill off 90% of it. But if you keep to that cycle for long enough, you allow yourself, you end up creating some pretty cool things because you are your own worst critic, especially when you feel like trash. And when you discipline yourself to at least making forward movement, you really are the best person to refine the terrible ideas out. And then
Yeah.
when you're creative, you're creating such an abundance of things that maybe it's the 3, 4, 5% that survive the next process, but you do that for months and you start to create something that's super valuable. And additionally, you give yourself the gift of not succumbing to the despair that's part of this natural monthly cycle that we're going to walk through. So it's like, okay, today I'm just going to, and this is where like winning the day is so important. Okay, today I'm not feeling it, but my feelings are lying to me. So I'm not going to try and create things, right? Because that's just punishing myself because I'm not in the right headspace. But I do have all this administrative work that if I get it done, I'm free to do these other things, or I could do this proofreading. And sometimes you're so self-destructive in those moments, you're like, I can't even proofread this because I just want to throw it all away. So I'm going to pause. I'm just going to do these tasks that need done, right? That I've been putting off, because then at least I can accomplish something, win the day, get to what I need to do. But when you begin to look at giving yourself the grace of this reality, I think that that's what really gives the endurance to go the distance, because it's not every day the same exact response. It's not a steak every single day. It's, okay, I'm acknowledging the shifts, the pulse, the vibrational changes, all these things. And how can I best show up as who I am today to better myself than I was tomorrow, to accomplish these goals over a long time horizon?
Which I think a lot of that goes back to, funny how life works. I had a conversation like this with a friend of mine yesterday, and she said that you can't plant the seed today and expect to harvest it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly what it is that there's this, and it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? Of living in this age of instant gratification, things are available to you within fingertips. It's a blessing, as in, yes, it can expedite certain things. It can make the information go faster from one source to another. It's a curse where it doesn't allow the natural process of development of things to occur without us as beings somehow wanting to interfere and interrupt and change the outcome. So I think there's a lot with what you just said, and I was just laughing because I think it's so true. It's so, some of these things in life, you hear it from another person's perspective, and you just can't help but to laugh
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost like one of those universal things, right? We all have
Yeah.
those days. Like, there are days when I'm extremely creative, and then there are days where, like, nope, F all this. I don't want to do any of it. Why did I do this to begin with? What's the point? And to some degree, going back to the contrast component, I think there's beauty within that. There's
Well,
beauty within those days, and I think to some degree, what I've learned, what ultimately quote unquote saves or allows those days to smoothly transition from one to the next, is discipline. Having
mm-hmm.
enough discipline to understand that, okay, today is not a creative day, therefore it's probably not best use of my time to do a creative project right now. What other thing can I do that can move the needle forward?
Yes.
And really in simplifying it to such degree that, okay, just because you didn't achieve 10 things today, it doesn't mean that today was a failure. All it means that you did not achieve 10 things today, period. No additional meaning needs to be attached to that. And I don't know what your to-do looks like. For me, it looks like, I'm looking at it right now, 7, 8 different tasks, right? Now, on any given, there are some times where I get through those. On other days, I get through 3.
Mm-hmm.
Do I look at the rest of that as, man, I'm a failure, this sucks? No, it's there. That choice is always there to look at the day like that. But then it's like, going back to your point, what's the point? What's the alternative? What value does that actually bring me in looking at my day as a failure? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it just drags you down even more. And if you allow it, it's going to carry over into the next day, and then next week, next month, next year, and then boom, 5 years down the road, you've developed this self-image. Much of it had to do due to a series of choices that you had made over the course of a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it is important to be honest with oneself. If on the adverse side, let's say you have plans of, there's things you need to do, and instead you get drunk and the day's gone. I think it's okay to say that was unacceptable, and I will not tolerate that today, right? That was a failure that I will not replicate. which is a more extreme version than saying, okay, I had 10 tasks, I only got 3. Well, that's life. Sometimes that's just life. I fully agree. And to the planting the seed, if you're not who you want to be, or if you want something that's of great significance, there's this old adage that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. And when you pull on that, you talked about discipline, and I firmly believe that discipline predicates everything good. Jocko Willink put it as discipline equals freedom. And if you don't know if you don't even know like what an ideal version of self or what you could want from this life, but you want better, I would advocate that you start by cultivating and forming discipline in yourself. And that will create a foundation upon which you can do far more. And when you're looking at like the other element that I think is critical in plugging into that is stress is a response to missed expectations. So setting expectations as healthily and robustly as possible is critical in everything that we're talking about, because like what you just discussed with, okay, I have 10 things to do today. If I get 3, is that a failure? Well, what if those 3 just took a significant amount of time to create the proper value that they deserved? Well, what we just talked about is shifting our expectations from, is the day a success or a failure if I get all 10, or is the day a success or a failure if I accomplish, or if I create as much value as humanly possible? Well, then it shifts to, well, in doing those things, did that create as much value as I could have today? Yes. Okay, I just won. It doesn't matter that there's 7 for tomorrow. And frankly, there's always a amount of work that you'll never have finished. So in my mind, it's like the question I ask is, did I prioritize my time such that it best aligned my actions to create as much value today as possible? And that is the thing that I'm always working to tweak and adjust to create more, better, more optimally. And, my expectations that I'm set, if I'm disappointed in the day, it's because I wasted time, or I didn't spend the time as fruitfully as I could have. So I work to adjust that for tomorrow. And it's really rarely ever connected to, did I get all the things I wanted to done? It's more so the expectations have shifted to, am I aligned with my true north and how I'm accomplishing that which I need to do today? Because sometimes one task will take 4 days and the list continues to grow behind it, but that's what's necessary to create the impact you desire. And, but that all comes from, the discipline, consistency of continuing to show up and setting the correct expectations and shifting your mindset from a scarcity mindset to an abundance, and going from playing the short game to the infinite game, which is all part of the transformative process. But there's a lot to explore there too.
Wow. Well, Mr. John Mayo, where do people connect with you? Because obviously, as we've proven, we can have a conversation on top of a conversation multiple times. What do you have going on? Where can people find out about the Waymaker community, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So anything and everything I'm doing can be found at johnmayo.com. That's John without an H. But if you go to johnmayo.com, you'll be able to find everything that I'm up to. The Waymaker community, which is an awesome opportunity, books, podcast, some AI solutions, and a few other cool things, such as CC Stamina, which is our performance energy supplement, which is a really cool thing. But yeah, anything and everything I'm doing, you'll find it right there.
Where's the book again? Is it on Amazon?
Book is on Amazon. Yes. Amazon, Audible, iTunes.
What's it called again? Be Relentless?
Yes. Be Relentless. If the obstacle is the way, then we must be waymakers. And you can find and be linked to it through johnmayo.com as well.